We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
And Michael De La Maza, PhD in computer science from MIT, is an Agile coach and trainer, and he will give us a splendid session. And now I'm going to change to him.
The wisdom seeker who is seeking wisdom. And the wisdom seeker learns that there's this very wise person at the top of a mountain and is not sure what mountain it is. So the wisdom seeker spends years climbing up mountains, climbing down mountains, getting tired, getting exhausted, getting frustrated, seeking wisdom. Finally, the wisdom seeker hears that the wise person is on top of this particular mountain, starts climbing up the mountain. There's an avalanche, slides to the bottom of the mountain, starts climbing up again, breaks a leg, has to be helicoptered off the mountain, starts climbing again. Finally reaches the top of the mountain, dehydrated, tired, exhausted. And there's the wise person. And the wisdom seeker says, "Wise person, share your wisdom with me." And the wise person says, "The only wisdom on this mountain is the wisdom you brought with you." So my name is Michael De La Maza. I'm going to be talking about 4 topics today. Stress, belief system, money, and uncertainty. After I get finished with those topics, I'm going to, as a special treat, talk about 2 other things, the Virtual Agile Reading Group and the Agile Practice Group. These are 2 ideas I've had for a long time, and I've decided to launch them at this talk. When I shared the concept of the Agile Practice Group with Norman Doust, who's sitting right there, he said, "It's a great idea." So we'll hear from Norman why he thinks the Agile Practice Group is a great idea. So this talk is primarily about self-compassion and how I develop self-compassion for myself, right? So I want to be clear that I'm going to be quite vulnerable in this talk. So I ask you to hold this space. That doesn't mean keep it in confidence. I'm obviously being videotaped. But just to hold this space, which will allow me to share with you what I've learned as an Agile consultant. So this is about how I overcame self-humiliation, self-evaluation, self-judgment, blame, and guilt. All the things that get in the way of being an Agile consultant. And I invite comments and questions, thoughts from all of you throughout the talk. This is what makes the talk interesting to me. So we're going to start off with a little exercise. So I invite all of you to stand up to do the exercise. And the first thing that you do is you take your left hand and you put your thumb in front so I can see your thumb just like you can see my thumb. And you put it on your right ear. Fantastic. And then you do the same thing with the right arm, so the right arm is crossing over the left. Awesome. See, the camera should be pointed the other direction. So. Okay? And so now what we're going to do is do very gentle squats. Don't hurt yourself. Okay? And we're going to inhale on the way down and exhale on the way out. So it looks like this. Don't hurt yourself again. Don't have a huge inhale, exhale. And we'll do 9 of these. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. Congratulations. You can be seated. So some of you who came early and sat in the front have some dark chocolate. So you like dark chocolate?
Yeah.
What does dark chocolate taste like?
Heaven. It tastes like chocolate.
It tastes like heaven? Okay, so feel free to have a piece of dark chocolate. And if you see someone around you who doesn't have a piece, feel free to share it with them. So when I think about talks like this, I like to divide them into one of 4 categories: knowledge, practice, reflection, and inspiration. This talk is primarily a reflection, okay? A reflection on what I've experienced as a Scrum consultant. It's not about knowledge and it's not about any method. Okay? So what that means is that there are no take-home messages in the talk. At least that's not my intention. Okay? No take-home messages. Okay? If you want to take home messages, then you're welcome to do it. But one thing I invite you to do is just to try to consider just understanding the talk directly without asking how it applies to you or your life. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to start off with the question, am I stressed? How do I figure out how I'm stressed? And how do I reduce my stress as an Agile consultant? Right? So as an Agile consultant, I'm constantly in stress. I'm in this very weird position where I come in and I say I'm a servant leader, but I'm talking to VP level folks and C level folks. I'm traveling a lot. Last year I traveled 150,000 miles, visited 7 different countries, paid income taxes in 4 different states. So I'm really stressed out all of the time. Okay? Why is this important? So Ben Horowitz, who is the Horowitz and Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top VC firms in the country, has this blog post in which he says, what's the most difficult CEO skill? It's managing your own psychology. Okay? So that's my view as an Agile consultant. The hardest thing for me by far is managing my own psychology. And when I'm internally a wreck and I'm blowing up, I'm just focused entirely on myself and not on the client, right? Not on the person I'm serving. And so understanding how I'm stressed and how stressed out I am and recovering from that quickly is really valuable to me. So that's what this section is about. So when I am stressed, I have health problems. My cognitive performance goes way down. And I'll give you some more details on this, on exactly why that happens. And then, of course, I'm focused on self-preservation, right? Getting through the stress myself. And I'm not really too worried about anything else that's happening. So I started off by doing a little bit of a literature search on this, and I discovered this little piece of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is often called the fight or flight center. Okay? And it responds to a variety of things, and one of the things it responds to are status attacks. Okay? And so, as an Agile consultant, I'm a walking status attack. Right? I remember one very specific situation in which I was walking down the corridor, and there was a vice president with his door open, and I was going to swing around. Okay? There was a person there talking to the vice president, a team member. The team member turned to walk away, and the vice president called me into his office. And the team member came back very angrily and said, "Oh, so you have time for him, but not for me." Right? So the team member had been asking the vice president for some time. The vice president had said, "I don't have time for you right now. Come back and schedule it for me," right? So status attacks. Okay? And the second thing is overwhelming change. Right? And Agile, of course, is an overwhelming change for just about everyone on an individual level, team level, etc. Okay? So the amygdala lights up. When the amygdala lights up, what happens? Here are some of the things that happen. So this term amygdala hijack comes from Daniel Goleman of emotional intelligence fame. So number one, it reduces blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, right? The conscious mind, the thinking mind, the logical mind. It increases blood pressure, right? Because I'm getting ready to fight or flight, right? How much I think doesn't really matter. Okay? So the end result is that because of this amygdala response, I actually get done. Okay? So I walk into a situation, I experience an amygdala hijack, or I cause other people to have amygdala hijacks, right? Okay? So that reduces the functionality of the entire organization. So the fact that the amygdala sort of operates independently of my conscious mind was an insight for me. So I had always thought that something like consciousness sat on top of the brain and controlled everything. So the consciousness was something like a puppet master. But here's the amygdala sort of operating by itself, doing things like reducing blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. And the amygdala does this sort of independently. It's not like the signal gets routed through the prefrontal cortex and then goes to the amygdala. The amygdala actually responds in something like 80 milliseconds, while the prefrontal cortex responds in 250 milliseconds. Right? So even before the prefrontal cortex even has an idea of what's going on, even senses the stimulus, the amygdala is already reacting. So this notion that I don't actually have one brain, but I have multiple brains who are all talking to each other and who can all activate and inhibit each other was very interesting to me. And just to drive the point home, when I eat, I think of having so many calories and being full. Okay? And I think about that with my prefrontal cortex, with my conscious mind. And it turns out that there's these great studies which show that the brain actually identifies food and reacts to food that have exactly the same caloric content in radically different ways. Okay? And that's because there are different parts of our brain, not the prefrontal cortex, the appetite brain, who are looking at these things. And they react differently. So here's one very clean example. Glucose and fructose have exactly the same calories. When you drink glucose, you have greater feelings of fullness. When you drink fructose, you don't. Okay? So you can have your prefrontal cortex, okay, saying anything it wants. You know, I'm drinking the same number of calories. But your hypothalamus, which is directly sensing these things in your bloodstream, reacts them in a completely different way. With fructose, I feel full. I don't feel full. With glucose, I feel full. Right? So it's just an example of the fact that the brain is not controlled by the consciousness. Okay? So what that leads me to think is that I have to operate in this brain-friendly manner, and in particular, in a way that's super friendly for the amygdala. Because the last thing I want is for the amygdala to take over, and I really don't have any choice. It's not like I can tell that my prefrontal cortex can say, calm down or don't be stressed. Right? It doesn't work that way. Right? The amygdala is operating essentially independently from the prefrontal cortex. And in fact, there are more neurons going into the prefrontal cortex than vice versa. So the amygdala can inhibit the prefrontal cortex. Okay? So my goal then is to manage stress, not time. And here's the way I used to do it. I used to do it by waiting to get sick. I'm really super stressed. My physical body can't take it, so I get stressed out, I get sick. Or sleep problems. So I happen to have insomnia when I'm under stress. So I would know that I was under stress when I couldn't go to sleep for 3 or 4 nights in a row, or when I got sick. Now the plan, do, check, adjust cycle on that is huge, right? It's multiple days, it's multiple weeks. Right? It takes me a long time to figure out what's going on. Right? So I have a challenging conversation with an executive, and a week later I get sick. Right? So I don't really know what's going on. So this was my mission. My mission was to figure out how to reduce this PDCA cycle down to a much shorter period of time, so I could, in some sense, address the stress and get better as quickly as possible, so that I could, in some sense, be with the client, right? As opposed to worrying about myself and processing my own stress, I could serve the client. Yes?
Can you just articulate again what is PDCA?
Plan, do, check, adjust. Yes. Right. So in Scrum, for example, you start off the sprint with a planning meeting, you execute, you check at the review, you adjust at the retrospective. Okay, so here's the new formula. So this is now how I react to stress. So I tried a whole bunch of experiments on myself, and this is the basic model I follow in trying to answer these questions, right? So first I start off with a literature search. That's where I learned about the amygdala. And then I do a bunch of experiments on myself, right? Testing out a whole bunch of different things. And there are actually things that are better than heart rate at measuring stress. But I found that heart rate was great because it's very simple to measure, and there are many, many ways to measure it. In fact, there are iPad applications that will measure your heart rate, and it does it by using the camera. So you don't need anything else. So you can measure your heart rate at any point in time. So my resting heart rate is in the low 50s, and I can also compare it to my previous heart rate measurement. Sometimes I'll do that because I've just finished exercising, so it'll be higher. So it's not correct to compare it to resting heart rate. And if my heart rate is really high, that's an indication that I'm under stress. And so I stop working and immediately address that. So I don't allow the stress to accumulate or the stress to persist. And the techniques that I use are not really all that important. They're, again, just the results of self-experimentation. But the 3 I use are meditation, heart math, which I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating next, and then nonviolent communication, which is the next section. And then if it's low, I proceed. So I'm able to do this, throughout the day, examining my heart rate. And just like heart rate is a measure of physical stress, it turns out that it's also a measure of emotional stress. So here's just some data from a self-experiment. This is before and after meditation. So the blue dots are before meditation. This is just 15 meditation sessions. Green dots are after meditation. And on average, this 20 to 25 minute meditation session reduces my heart rate by 12 beats per minute. And then the final thing I do is I do a study on other people. And the reason I'm doing a study on other people is that this is something that I want to bring in to a consulting environment, right? Let's measure our heart rate to see how we're doing, right? As part of, say, the daily stand-up, okay? So the way I do this is that I put an ad on Craigslist. So this is the actual ad I used for the heart rate study. It says $25 for 25 minutes of your time. And then it says, I'm doing a study on the effects of stress on heart rate. We'll begin with a stress-free conversation, which I'll collect your baseline heart rate. And then after that, you'll give me a stressful phrase, and I'll repeat that stressful phrase over and over again and watch your heart rate. Okay? So if you do this, you'll get dozens and dozens of responses. And then I show up at Panera early in the morning, and I set up a little office there. So there's my laptop, there's my notebook, there's a video camera, and there's actually a plug on the lower left-hand side where I hook up my laptop and my video camera. And then people start coming in. So here are 4 subjects that participate in this most recent experiment. So they sit there and they talk to me for about 25 minutes, and I get the baseline heart rate, and then I get their heart rate under stress. Okay? And here's the key table of results. So on the left-hand side, we have Donna, who came in at 8:30 a.m. Her baseline heart rate was 68. Her stress average was 75. This is when I was repeating this stressful phrase again and again and again. The peak, the stress peak, was 85. And then I had 2 hypotheses. One was that 1 out of 10 people would see a 10-point increase in heart rate. And another one was that 3 out of 10 people would see a 5-point increase in heart rate. And you see that this easily exceeded it. So about half the people experienced a 10-point increase in heart rate, and everyone except Cynthia, who happened to be a vegetarian, experienced a 5-point increase in heart rate. So this is what the low-level data looks like. This is what the low-level data looks like. So on the left side, you see the baseline heart rate. So this is just having a conversation with this particular individual, just talking about what did you do yesterday, what's the weather like, things like that. And then I say, give me a stressful phrase, and approximately right here, she tells me that she became a widow 2 months ago, and you see what happens to the heart rate. So here's 7 minutes, this is 8 minutes, so each of these tick marks is 10 seconds. This increase goes from like 70 to 80, so we have something like a 10 heartbeats per heart rate increase in 5 seconds, simply by thinking and saying the phrase, I became a widow 2 months ago. Okay? So a really, really fast way of detecting stress. Right? Measure the heart rate, and 5 seconds, 10 seconds later, there's a reading. Right?
How did you measure
So,
heart rate?
yes?
How did you measure the heart rate? The heart rate in this case?
Yes, I'm going to show you exactly how I measured the heart rate. Okay? So I used this device called the M-Wave, which goes up here. I already have it running. So this is a sensor that hooks up to your laptop. And it clips to your left ear. And does anyone want to guess what my heart rate is going to be?
60.
It's going to be super high, I hope, I expect. So I'm going to click start, and after a little bit, you'll see the heart rate going. And in the lower right-hand corner, sort of you see the heart rate, and then you see a graph of the heart rate. And then at the top, you see the heart rate as well. Okay? So this is how I measure the heart rate, okay, in the things. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to repeat this experiment now. And then I want to give you guys, some of you, a heart rate monitor, and we're going to repeat it in this room. So I need a volunteer who's going to come up here and say a stressful phrase to me sort of over and over again. I'll supply the stressful phrase, okay? But you need to say it over and over again. And you need to like really say it like you mean it. That's the important thing, right? So there needs to be like hatred and anger and contempt in your voice. David is very happy to hear these things. Okay?
Come up now?
Yes, please, come up now. Okay, and then we need an observer. So the observer is just a person who's going to look very carefully at this. You're going to talk to me just about random things. And then once the observer says, I've got your baseline heart rate, then you're going to repeat the stressful phrase. Okay? Okay, so who wants to be the observer? Okay, Marina. Oh, Eric. Okay.
Excuse me, may I interject just for a second?
Yes.
Do you both mind being videotaped?
It's fine.
It's okay? Great, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so you're just going to talk to me about the weather, about sports, about things like that. Okay, wait just a second. And then at some point, Eric's going to say, I have the baseline heart rate. Okay, so what you're looking at is you're looking at this number in the lower right-hand corner, which right now is going off the charts. this is crazy, like I might keel over, right? So, and you're also looking at this up here, okay? Until you think it stabilizes or you think you have an average, it might take 30 seconds, okay? And then you're gonna repeat the stressful phrase, okay? And I'm gonna tell you what the stressful phrase is. The stressful phrase is, Michael, you're totally incompetent, you never keep your agreements. Okay? And so you have to say that phrase. You're going to say it over and over, and you're going to say it louder and louder. Okay? So it becomes more and more stressful to me. Okay?
Okay.
And don't stop until I say stop. Okay? You have to say really mean, etc. Okay? Okay, so first, just a simple conversation until you say stressful phrase, and we'll go for it. Okay?
And then can I say, I have my baseline, that's what I say?
Yeah, say I have your best baseline. Okay? Go for it.
It's a pretty pleasant day today. The
Yeah.
weather is sort of nice. It's, a good evening for a meeting.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really nice day for a meeting. The Bruins won last night. I was very happy to see that. Was it last night that they won?
Not sure. This morning. But, a nice crowd, and friends of yours that know you, and
Yeah.
it's sort of an open environment. It's easy being here, talking to people who came because they want to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
They'll benefit from your sharing your experience.
Yeah.
You're a pretty, laid back guy.
Laid back guy.
You can, relax and help people. What kind of things have you been doing recently?
I've been sleeping and working a lot. Preparing for this talk.
Right, well, taking naps is a good
Eating dark
thing.
chocolate.
At some point, you'll have to explain the motivation for the dark chocolate.
The motivation, okay.
But anyway, it doesn't need to be. So I like the charts that you made. They look informative, and it's clear that you put a lot of effort into areas.
Right, I have my baseline.
Yes, you ready?
Doesn't have it.
Unfortunately, Michael, you seem to be rather incompetent and many commitments that you don't meet. I find it, disappointing and actually quite frustrating.
Just repeat the same phrase over and over again, and make it more and more intense.
Okay.
Louder and louder.
Okay. So, Michael, you're incompetent, you don't meet your commitments. You're incompetent and you don't meet your commitments. Michael, you're really incompetent and you don't meet your commitments. Michael, how can you stand being so incompetent and not meeting your commitments? Michael, it's terrible that you're incompetent and you don't meet your commitments. Michael, you don't meet your commitments. Michael, how can you do that, Michael?
Enough. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Observer, what's the result? What was the baseline? What was the stress average?
You were all over the map.
I was all over the map.
You went up as high as 150.
150.
To 64 in the course of establishing the baseline. And then there was a period of like a lot of 130s and a little 117 or so. But and then clearly, again, the deviation wasn't so clear, but clearly, one under stress, your heart rate went significantly. It didn't go. It retained the high frequency components, and it didn't have low frequency ones.
Oh, okay, great. So if you were to say an average, how much did it go up? Do you have a guess?
Numerical average, I would say 50. I'd say 35.
35.
35 to 45%.
35 to 45%. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so
It's
much.
hard to
I
say 'cause
appreciate it.
the data was. It's hard for me to.
All right. Great. Thanks. So let's thank David and Eric. Yeah. So that's how it works. So that's how I actually did the experiment, and that's how I got those numbers. Okay. So the key thing here is that now the PDCA, plan, do, check, adjust cycle is something like 30 minutes. Right. Instead of having to wait weeks for the stress response, I can now get it as frequently as I want. Okay. And so here are just some examples of successes. So one is that I've been sick exactly once in the past year. I went through the entire winter without being sick, so this is somewhat unusual for me since I travel a lot and so forth. And in order to get sick, I had to do all of the following things. So number one, I traveled for 6 weeks, so I was not at home for 6 weeks in a row. Secondly, my girlfriend almost broke up with me.
those two livings related?
No, I was traveling to her.
Oh.
I started at a new client, which is always stressful. My sleep bank was at an all-time low. I keep track of my sleep and how much sleep I have, and this was at an all-time low, like negative territory. I put there a link to a Harvard blog which talks about disadvantages of not sleeping well. The numbers are really amazing. 1 hour sleep difference makes huge differences in how susceptible one is to cold viruses, etc. And finally, I ate sushi at a cafeteria. And that's what I think really prompted
That did it, huh?
I have allergy symptoms, seasonal symptoms, hay fever type of symptoms, and sometimes, in the past, I would go through an entire bag of cough drops in a day. This year, I have virtually no allergy symptoms. I haven't had any cough drops. Okay, and then Pomodoros. How many people know what a Pomodoro is? Yeah, do you want to explain what a Pomodoro is?
Pomodoro is when you set aside a very limited time, I think it's like 18 minutes or something, very short time for doing each thing. So you're time boxing almost everything into small time slices.
Right, so the way I do it is I do a 30-minute time box. I go 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest. That's 90 minutes. And then I take a longer rest. Okay? So I once heard a really well-known software engineer talk about this. He said, Pomodoro has changed my life. And he said that when he started doing Pomodoros, he could do 3 of them. And then at the end, he could start doing 4. So because of this technique, I'm now able to do 4 to 5 90-minute ones every day, day after day after day, no weekends, no nothing. And what am I doing is every 30 minutes, I'm taking my heart rate. And if my heart rate is high, I apply a protocol, right? Meditation, heart math, which is what I was doing just there, and nonviolent communication, which was what I was talking before, right? So as soon as I have stress, I address it because I know it through my heart rate, and I'm able just to keep working as far as I can tell forever. So I did this as an experiment for 20 days in a row, running 5 Pomodoros a day, and I felt fine throughout the entire time. I didn't feel like I was pushing myself. I didn't feel like I was fighting myself. It was just a very easy, natural thing to do. Right? So just radical increase in my ability to work. I had mentioned before that my resting heart rate is in the low 50s. So here's just proof of that. And it's difficult to know what my heart rate used to be, but it's extremely unlikely that it was in the low 50s. Right? Here's just some table showing heart rate and age. It actually doesn't matter. The age doesn't really matter very much. Average is in the low 70s, and low 50s is athlete performance. I was actually at a health conference, and they said, go ahead and take your heart rate. And I happened to be standing up at that time, waiting in line for lunch. And the organizer of the conference was standing right in front of me, and he had a heart rate monitor. And he said, take your heart rate. He took my heart rate. It came back 54. He said, that can't possibly be right. So he took it again, and it was right. And he asked me, do I do a lot of cardio? And the answer is, I don't do a lot of cardio. I go to gym 3 or 4 times a week, 15 minutes a day, 15 minutes when I go to gym, I do cardio. So I do about 1 hour of cardio a week. So I think this is because of my emphasis on heart rate and keeping it down, right? Using it as a stress measure. Right? I also have this thing that uses the heart rate variability, which is sort of a finer grain measure of stress. My stress level comes back 2%, 1% all the time. I hand it to my girlfriend, it's like 63%. I hand it to another Agile coach, it's 85%. So very, very low stress levels. And then my qualitative experience is that stress doesn't stick to me anymore. So my experience is that I can process extreme situations in like 18 hours. So when my girlfriend almost broke up with me, that's approximately how much time it took to process that extreme stress. Right? Whereas before, it would be weeks and weeks and weeks. Right? Weeks and weeks and weeks. And a very significant reduction in rumination, which is going over the same thought again and again and again. Here's a specific example of a place where it helped me. I was at a client, and 2 vice presidents who ran approximately 80% of the organization were in very significant conflict with each other. They were about to step into a room and have a conversation. They asked me to come into the room and just observe. So it was the 2 vice presidents plus me. They had a conversation that I would describe as very, very tense for 20 minutes. And normally what I would be doing is experiencing extreme stress, and I would just be worried about self-preservation. Here, that didn't happen. I was able to focus on them. And at the end, they turned to me and say, any comments? And I was able to ask a question that both of them said to me repeatedly over the course of the next week, absolutely nailed the situation. Right? So that's the value to the client, right? That I'm now able to live through sort of extreme stress, whereas before I wasn't, and I'm able to focus on the client and serve the client in ways I wasn't able to before. And one thing that I was able to do, the thing I did during this 20 days of nonstop work, was I created this intermediate online course called the Robust Scrum Master. And all of you are getting a free coupon to that course. It's free until Monday. You can use it at any time. You just need to apply the coupon within the next 4 or 5 days. So apply the coupon and you can take it a year from now. And if you don't have one, you can just come up and I'll give it to you. Okay, so in terms of next steps, one very interesting thing that I've recently discovered is this program called ePeace, and which is a combination of HeartMath, which is this thing that I was just showing you and using, this heart rate monitor, in a certain way of addressing heart rate and getting biofeedback on heart rate, along with nonviolent communication, which is what I'm going to be talking about next. Okay, so this is really, really fascinating to me. When I learned about it, I said, wow, that's exactly right. So HeartMath takes care of the physiology, right? The high heart rate, the sweating, the blood pressure, right? Which is the normal reaction to sort of extreme anger or stress. And then nonviolent communication takes care of the rest of the stuff, right? So first take care of the body, make sure the body is safe, and then work through the actual conflict. So that's what I'm going to plan to do next. Okay, so that was the first part of the talk on stress and using heart rate to get really, really fast PDCA, right? From weeks and weeks and weeks down to 30 minutes. And then belief systems, that's what I'm going to be talking about next.
Michael?
Yes.
Could I say something related to the stress part?
Yes, yes.
After the massacres in Newtown, Connecticut,
Yeah.
the president was concerned about gun violence and
Yeah.
some things that he could do unilaterally, and one of them was concern for mental health.
Yeah.
And to create a national discussion on mental health. There was a conference on that this past Monday, and there are now national online discussions about mental health. This is, in the same sort of area. One of the things I was really amazed to find is that in a year, about 20% of Americans are going to have some kind of mental health problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to refer people to the online discussions about that, because it might well be helpful. In a room this size, probably 20 people are going to have some kind of mental health issue.
Right. And there's a thought that occurs to me when I hear that. So I once heard a psychologist say that it's not useful to think of mental health as something that you either have or don't have. It's simply a spectrum. And so you can always be thinking about it. And so I find that perspective sort of really useful. Yeah. So I'm going to talk now about nonviolent communication, which is a set of beliefs and a set of practices, a way of being, developed by Marshall Rosenberg in the 1960s, based on the nonviolent work of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And there are a whole bunch of things that are really important about NVC. That's the acronym for it. And I'm just going to talk about a few things. This is not an introduction to NVC. This is just a comment on how it helped me. So one of them is that every action is an attempt to meet a need. Okay, so every human action is an attempt to meet a need. Now this statement is just unbelievably, phenomenally powerful. It took me like 2 years to get the understanding that I have today, and I'm open to the possibility that 2 years from now, my understanding will be different. So here's one of the implications of this. If every action is an attempt to meet a need, then that means that there's no right and wrong. Because everyone is doing exactly the same thing. Right? They're doing the best they can to meet their needs. Right? So let's say that someone is yelling at me. Right? Or let's say that someone is lying at me. Right? Or let's say that someone is punching me. Right? That person's not evil. That person's not bad. That person is doing the best they can to meet their needs, which is exactly what I'm doing. Okay. So, as an Agile consultant, coming in with a stance of non-evaluation, non-judgment is phenomenally important. And so NVC aligns perfectly with that view. Okay. So it starts with myself, though, right? Not criticizing myself, not hating certain parts of myself. And that's really what's been most relaxing and most freeing for me, right? Creating a space for myself in which I can fully accept all of myself, which then gives me the opening to fully accept everyone else. So a good question to ask is, what is a need? What is a human need? So in NVC, there are a variety of lists. There's no authoritative list. One list I like to use is the list developed by Reiss, who's a psychologist, and he talks about 16 needs. And you can just read through them, right? So the need for acceptance, the need to avoid criticism and denial, social contact, the need for friendship, honor, the need to remain true to one's principles. Right? So every action is an attempt to meet one of these needs. Exactly what the list is not super important. So, I'm giving this talk now, and so I'm attempting to meet some of these needs. So, what are some of the needs I might be trying to meet? The need for curiosity, the need to acquire knowledge, the need for status, the need for prestige, right? So every single interaction, everything I do is an attempt to meet a need. So just asking the question, what needs do I have now? What needs are being met? What needs are not being met? Is a super, super powerful question. And the same thing for the other person, right? If someone is yelling and screaming at me, that is to say, you're acting in a way that doesn't meet my needs, I can ask the question to myself, what needs of theirs are they attempting to meet? Okay, so when I saw this movie, Neo, right? You guys have seen this movie, Matrix, where he dodges bullets, right? Zillions and zillions of bullets. So NBC gave me a lot of insight into how to be like Neo. Okay? So I thought that Neo was able to dodge these bullets because he was super powerful, super strong, and super smart. Right? That's why he was able to dodge the bullets. And so I thought that that's what I wanted to do too, because I wanted to dodge the bullets. Okay? But now, as a result of NBC, I'm actually able to dodge the bullets, like literally able to dodge the bullets. I'm able to maintain perfect stillness in situations in which other people find extremely challenging. And the reason is that the bullets are not for me. When that person is yelling, screaming, being frustrated, angry, criticizing me, right, they're attempting to meet their needs. It actually has nothing to do with me at all, right? And the emotions that they're experiencing, right, anger, frustration, irritation, those are just indications, signals that their needs are not being met. So I'm able to be perfectly still in all sorts of situations where before I was extremely challenged by them, right? And would just go into self-criticism, self-humiliation. So I'm going to just go through a discussion that I had on the Kanban development user group. Right? So I'm an Agile consultant. I do that full-time, 100%. I've been doing that for about 5 years now. I get 100% of my business through referrals. Okay? David Anderson, the creator of the Kanban method, one of the most significant, most powerful people in this field. Okay? And this is on his site, right? This is on his discussion group. So I asked some questions, and I actually requested that if people had a comment on the question and weren't actually going to answer the question, that they start a separate thread. So David, in the very same thread, responded, and the first sentence is, the question is completely wrong-headed. Okay? So before I would have found this extremely challenging, right? This is just a threat to me, and it's a threat to my business. Okay? So here was my response. Okay, I said, I don't understand something or other, and I explained my question something or other. Okay, so this is what I would consider to be a response that was really helped by NVC. I'm talking about myself and what's going on for me, as opposed to lashing out or responding or saying you're right or wrong. Okay, David responds again with a long thing and saying again it's wrong-headed. Okay? And then I once again respond with what I would consider to be a response from the NVC stance. Okay, so I'm able to stay, perfectly still, perfectly calm. That was my internal experience of this. Right? I'm wondering, there's something going on for David. He's experiencing some emotions, which suggests that some needs of his are not being met. And then I'm going to show you this answer, which is from someone else. And this starts off, he's addressing David and says, this response is unworthy of you. It sounds rather arrogant. And I say this, and I show you this, not because I think of this as some competition between David and me. Right? I don't think of it at all. I had a question. He had a response which suggests that his needs were not being met. I was curious about it. I persisted in asking my question. I show you this because this is the common experience that third-party observers have when they're viewing an interaction between a person who's being violent and a person who's being nonviolent. They feel a much, much closer sense of connection to the person who's being nonviolent than to the person who's being violent, right? And it's just unbelievably powerful, right? So I'm a person who's completely unknown on this discussion group. I posted exactly 7 sentences. David Anderson, world famous, the guy who owns the discussion group, drives the discussion group. And then this person in 5 minutes gets this sort of connection, right? Super powerful. And then being able to create this space for me allows me to sometimes create this space for other people. So just last week, I had a friend who was engaging in a lot of self-criticism, and I tried to hold this space of non-judgment, non-evaluation for her for about 3 hours, and she wrote me this email. She said, "Thank you so much for what I experienced as you being a model of unconditional love today. I was struggling so much internally with myself and judging myself harshly for being like that, and you seem to model a willingness of total acceptance of how I was." Right? So that's the dream scenario for me, to be able to fully accept myself and fully accept other people, and then be able to get a response like this. Right? So complete and total acceptance of a person, right, no matter where they are in that. Right? So again, absolutely valuable skill for me as an Agile consultant, right? To be able to walk into a space and fully accept the whole person exactly as they are without having any contempt or any judgment like I used to have. So I want to just talk a little bit about Martin Luther King, who drew really strongly on nonviolent concepts of Gandhi. And so for me, what's super impressive about nonviolence, on which nonviolent communication is based on, and Gandhi and Martin Luther King are probably the best known practitioners of nonviolence over the last 50 years, is that both of these people were under what I would consider to be extreme stress for an extended period of time. Right? They, both had death threats, and of course, they were both assassinated. And they stayed in nonviolence, and not only did they stay in nonviolence, they actually deepened their commitment to nonviolence throughout their lives. Okay? And so I'm just going to go through the letter from a Birmingham jail and just talk about the nonviolent characteristics of it, and actually also one violent comment that Martin Luther King makes. So here's the background to the letter from a Birmingham jail. So in 1963, year that Kennedy was assassinated, this is before the assassination. So there was a campaign in Birmingham against segregation in stores. Okay? And on April 10th, so there were these protests, okay, that King was involved in. There was the city government, Birmingham, obtained an injunction preventing the protests, right, making the protests illegal. Okay? And King, Abernathy decided to continue protesting, and so they were arrested. And they were arrested actually for parading without a permit. And there was shortly after he was arrested, a set of 8 Birmingham clergy wrote a letter which made 3 main points. Number 1, you guys are outsiders. Number 2, your actions are untimely. And number 3, you should address your concerns through the court system. And Letter from a Birmingham Jail is King's response to this. And he started writing it on the edges of a newspaper, on the margins of a newspaper, and then continued on a notepad after one of his aides brought it to him. Okay, so here's the letter from the clergy. So we're now confronted by a series of demonstrations directed and led in part by outsiders. So that's important because King was from Atlanta, which is about 150 miles away from Birmingham. And it says, we recognize the natural impatience of people, but we think that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. Right, so slow down. Okay, so King starts off at the beginning of the letter and he says, I assume that you're gentlemen of goodwill. Okay, so this is to me very similar to the NVC stance. Right? You're not bad, you're not evil, you're not hateful. Right? You're, I assume, in good intent. Okay? And then he responds to these things like you're an outsider, by just a recitation of facts. He doesn't say, I'm not an outsider, I'm an American citizen, I can go wherever I want to go, you're the ones who are wrong. He says, I'm part of this group, I head this group, which has affiliations in many places. One of them is Birmingham, we agreed to support them, that's why I'm here. And just a set of facts. He talks about his emotional state. Our hopes have been blasted. A shadow of disappointment settled on us. Okay. Emotional state, indication that needs are not being met. And then he does something very interesting. He talks about the 4 steps of direct action. And the third step is something called self-purification. So before direct action, before the commitment to nonviolence, there's a conversation among the people to make sure that they're willing to make the sacrifices that direct action requires, right? Such as being jailed, right? So they actually pause, right? After the negotiations fail, they actually pause and say, okay, now we're going to start protesting. We're going to be violating the law, and we might get thrown in jail. Are we willing to act non-violently in this situation? Right? They pause and ask themselves that question, right? They do this large, massive check-in, right? So this is now something that I started coaching Scrum Masters on, right? To do a check-in on yourself, when you become a Scrum Master, there's going to be significant self-sacrifice in many situations as you're serving the team. Okay, he isn't completely free of judgment, not even Martin Luther King. So he talks about hate-filled policemen, cursing, kicking, etc. Okay? So just to demonstrate that there's still the possibility of violence even in a letter like this. So here's King reading Gandhi, and as I mentioned before, what I find so extraordinarily powerful about this mindset and about this set of beliefs is that it served Gandhi and Martin Luther King in this period of extreme situations. Right? So I consider NVC to be sort of a fundamentally different thing and a fundamentally different type of thing than something like crucial communications or difficult conversations or something like that. Okay, so my results are that I found this very stable belief system that I have found to be extremely helpful in both professional and personal situations. And the next step is to work on family issues. So in NVC classes, the funny thing is that they always tell you work on family issues last because those are the hardest. So that's where we care the most, right? And that's right? So that's the next step in my evolution of applying NVC to my life. Okay, I'm gonna. The next section is on financial fear and overcoming financial fear. How many people have experienced financial stress at any point in their life? Nice. Okay, so I just want to invite you just once again, right? So, as I said at the top, I invite you to consider the following, which is, this is my experience, and I'm just concerned about the sense of, it worked for Michael, it might work for me, right? I just invite you to just directly think about the material as opposed to thinking about how it applies to you. Okay, so I had this conversation with David Chilcott. How many people here know David Chilcott? Oh, wow, okay, so he's a yes, of course. Out in San Francisco, has done some extremely interesting work. I did a bunch of interviews with him a couple of years ago. One of them is on this link that I have here. And he said in the course of that interview that money is more taboo than sex. Okay? And I think that's really part of the culture and part of the culture that I've inculcated. And so here are some examples of my money nuttiness. So I have this belief that I need money, so that means I can't get fired. So I need the money. But if I can't get fired, then when the client says, Michael, can you create a Gantt chart for the team and assign tasks to the developers? I say, okay, I can't get fired, so I have to do that, right? So it leads to dysfunctional behavior, stress, sickness, poor performance, failed agile transitions, right? And so money is challenging here. It's causing a problem. Here's an example, a real-world example of something I did. So a senior executive walked into the team room when the team was out and looked at the board, the various visual indicators, and said, the team is behind on its sprint forecast, and then asked me, shouldn't everyone be in the room, or is that too much to expect of Agile? Right? And I said, yeah, you can expect that, right? So total failure on my part as an Agile consultant, because I'm worried about getting fired, right? So overcoming this financial fear is sort of important. Here's an example of psych-out type of self-talk. So I'm here to do what is best for the client. The client wants a 20% discount. So if I don't give the client the discount, then I'm not doing what's best for the client. And by the way, do I deserve to be charging what I'm charging? Right? Those are examples of this self-talk, all driven by this financial concern. So, my feelings around money, were of, great constriction and desperation. Right? I really need it. I need to do whatever I can to get the money. So here are just a few things that I did to address that. So one, is I read this book, which unfortunately I've lost, and I haven't found, and it said a great negotiating tactic is just to say no. Okay? So there was one particular time a couple of years ago where I was feeling particularly flush, and I was in the middle of a conversation about starting out a new client, and I said, I'm going to try this. And so here's how it looks like. I've changed the names and changed the phrasing a little bit, but the timestamps are right and the sentence is totally right. So I get an offer, and I say, you know, that rate does not work for me. I want all hours paid, and I want all expenses paid. The person comes back and says, you know, I was able to talk to my account manager, and we can cover $250 worth of expenses per day, which is, of course, not what I had asked for. I had asked for all of the expenses. Now here the timestamp is important. So this is December 27th at 2:10 p.m. So the engagement is supposed to start on January 1st, right? Obviously, if I say no, I close, right? But I was very proud of myself. Just 14 minutes later, I was able to respond with saying that doesn't work, right? So I was able to stay in my no, right? I was able to stay in my no and take care of my needs in that situation, right? Be free of the financial terror. Okay? And the outcome is actually not important, right? I'll note that the outcome is actually not important because it's not about winning the negotiation, right? The second thing, yes.
But anyway, how did it come out?
Oh, yeah, just between us, yeah, so they gave me what I wanted, yeah. Yeah, they gave me what I wanted.
But you didn't win.
No, it's not a compliment, yeah. The second thing, a very interesting concept that was taught to me by a life coach I worked with for about 13 months called upper limiting. So it's an idea that's talked about in this book called The Big Leap. It was written by Gay Hendricks. And the idea is that everyone has a limit on how happy they think they deserve to be. And when they approach that limit, they engage in destructive behavior that makes them less happy. Okay? So when I read this, I was like paging through the book and I was like, wow, this is fascinating because this exactly describes me in many different situations. So here's one stream of thought that I have and to some degree still have now. I have the belief that money is a reward for working hard. My father works harder than I do. Therefore, I should make less money than my father. Okay, so that's a really clean example of upper limiting yourself. Okay, and so if I look at my financial, and then the even sicker thing about that one is that I actually have only the vaguest idea of how much money my father makes. Right? I have like some memory of when I was like 11 years old of like overhearing some conversation. Okay. Now, if I look at my federal AGI on my tax form, it goes bing down, bing down, bing down, right? And like I go out of my way to get fired at the moment that I'm about to cross the line, right? So just being aware of that, has just been very interesting and useful for me. Okay, and then the third thing was just thinking about other people. Right? Thinking about other people and situations. Right? So if this is difficult for me, I imagine that it must be difficult for other people. Okay? And at the very beginning, there's this little asterisk. I hope you all saw it next to the title, next to my name, next to all the speakers' names. It says the views expressed by the author may not necessarily be those of A&E. So this particularly applies to this section here. Okay? So I did some work on what a C corporation is about. So the C corporation, the C just refers to a subchapter of the IRS regulations. Okay? So subchapter C, just about everyone who works for a large company works for a C corporation. Okay? And most people work for a Delaware C corporation. Well over 50% of the Fortune 500 are Delaware C corporations. And C corporations, by their charter, by law, are required to maximize profit. That's what they're required to do by law. It's illegal to do anything else. Okay? Like strictly illegal to do anything else. So when you see a C corporation say something like, we really care about our employees, they only care about their employees as a means to an end, right? They don't care about it as an end to itself, right? Or about the environment or about anything else except profit, right? And that's not really by choice, that's by law. That's by their corporate charter. Okay? And so if you take the NVC stance, there's this fundamental misalignment. Because what human beings are doing is meeting their needs, which are on the right side, and you'll see that money is not on that list. Whereas what C corporations are doing is maximizing the amount of money they make. Right? And as an Agile consultant, I rub up against this all of the time. Right? I was once having a conversation sort of during an interview with an executive who was going to make some decision. And he said, so how do I know if Agile is working? And I said, oh, the people will be happy, right? Because their needs are being met, and so they're happy, right? And the emotion associated with needs being met. And the executive laughed and said, but what's in it for me? Right? That's the fundamental misalignment. Okay? And so my view is that this is not a small thing. Okay? This is a huge thing, and if I were asked the question, what's the real reason that people are so unhappy in large corporations? It's because of this. Right? What you keep asking why, and there's actually a different answer. Right? So as an Agile consultant, I started off by doing a lot of alignment work at companies, and I thought it was like a super powerful technique. Oh wow, these people are not getting along because they just don't agree on stuff. So we just need to get them together, talk, and they're going to figure that out. But in fact, that's actually not possible. It's not possible because the corporation, the entity, wants something different than the people inside of the corporation. Yes?
Well, I must make a comment here.
Yes, please.
Because the way I understand Agile, it is a way to maximize profits. Because the way waterfall used to go, there is a lot of waste of money for the corporation producing something that the customer in the end doesn't want. So it's either the customer who loses money or the corporation who loses money. The money, or a huge chunk of it, is waste. So with Agile, you ensure that you can improve on the profits. So the fact that it also helps with the people value is a bonus. The CEO doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about the profits, and that helps you.
Right. So thanks for sharing that interpretation. Okay, so that's an interpretation. So my view is different. Okay, but I think that this is exactly a point that Agile consultants differ on, and it's fine to disagree on. So the way I see it is, for me personally, there's a set of things that are good for the corporation, a set of things that are good for the people, and I personally, professionally, just want to operate here. Okay, so I'm not going to do things that are good for the corporation, but bad for the people. Right? Personally, I don't want to do that. I'm open to the possibility that other people want to do that. And then if the corporation just wants me to focus on here, right, then we have the intersection. Right? But it does, yes, but there is a limitation, right? So I'm removing myself from a whole bunch of places. And then I just want to mention the Declaration of Independence, my perspective on the Declaration of Independence. So we have unalienable rights. They're given to us by our Creator. Okay? And I should just mention, just as American History Review, that Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and Constitution are the top 3 laws in our country. Right? So we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Endowed by the Creator. So if I take an NVC interpretation of this, the need for life is a need, universal human need. Liberty is also a need. Okay? And pursuit of happiness is quite interesting. So happiness is an emotion which is associated with needs being met. And pursuit of happiness is all of the things that we do to make ourselves happy. Okay, and what is a government about? The government is about doing the things collectively that we can't do individually. It's about securing those rights. Right? And that's not me saying it. That's the very next sentence, but said much more eloquently. That to secure those rights, governments are instituted. Right? So we create the government to help us secure these rights, these needs. Right? So if I were reading this document, I would think, oh, so the people in the United States, they've organized themselves into these entities, things, groups that meet their needs, right? That are designed specifically to meet their needs. But in fact, when I look, we're organized to maximize profit, right? Which is not the same thing as meeting these human needs, right? So my view is that this is like a big problem all the way up to the top, right? Just a really, 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 really big issue. Not an issue that's going to be solved by an Agile consultant, but one that I want to be aware of, right? I will note that there are some alternatives, right? So I mentioned C Corporation most popular, but there are alternatives that are just being created. So just last year, Washington created something called a Social Purpose Corporation. And I had to include this quote because I just think it's so interesting. This is a quote from lawyers analyzing the law. These are corporations that are allowed to have objectives other than profit. Right? A C corporation is not allowed to have an objective other than profit. And then in California, there are these benefit flexible purpose corporations that you can actually choose. And what this does is it announces that you're going to be doing stuff that doesn't maximize profit, right? So shareholders, et cetera, right? And it allows you to do it. Otherwise, you can actually be sued for not maximizing profit. Okay, so here's some results. So last 3 clients, there have been no negotiation on rates. Right? I think that is largely because I no longer feel stress and emotion around money. So, you know, before when they would say, you know, Michael, what's your rate? I would say, oh, you know, it's, you want it to, yeah, right? There's a lot of fear around it. Now I say, my rate is, and they say, yes, sir, right? So just a lot of confidence, right? No more constriction and fear around the rates. And then almost complete relaxation around getting fired, which makes me a better Agile consultant, right? So I no longer contribute to the dysfunction. Okay, and then one thing that I've been thinking about for a really long time, but which I haven't been successful in doing, is value-based consulting. So for me, this is like a really big contradiction in the Agile consulting community, and I do it as well, which is that I go in and I talk about it's value, value, value. It's not about capacity. It's not about utilization. It's about value, 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 and I charge by the day. Right? And I've repeatedly tried not to charge by the day, but I can't communicate, right? You know, they'll say, we can't do that. The contracting office thinks that's weird, et cetera, right? So I've been talking about this for a long time. Jeff Sutherland has this piece on Agile contracting, and I can't get anyone to agree to it. Okay, and then the very last piece was about radical uncertainty. This is where I was going to play the video of the drug guys, the drug dealers. Unfortunately, the audio doesn't work. Yes, I know. Okay. So I can narrate it if you want, or I can just post it online. I'll give you guys that choice. So both. Okay. So I just want to say one word before I say that, which is that, you know, as an Agile coach, I say, look, you know, Agile is a system that's designed to operate well in uncertainty. And so I'm saying those words all the time for many, many years. But I really had to bring home to myself how uncertain the world is by doing practices like this. And I discussed this practice in the Robust Scrum Master course. So this is an expectations journal, which simply lists expectations that I have. Right? They're really tiny expectations over a very short period of time, like a day. So this particular one says, the 4:45 p.m. meeting will take place, the 3:30 p.m. meeting will take place, and I'll pick up my car. Right? So you see these are not, you know, big inferences, big jumps, etc. And then I simply tick off when they actually happen or don't happen. And my rate on this is about 60%. Okay? So, you know, random chance is 50%. I'm at 60% for understanding, right? So I experience the world as just being radically uncertain. And this, again, a practice that I'm now encouraging Scrum Masters and coaches just to do. Just write down expectations, take 5 minutes after the daily stand-up, what you think is going to happen the rest of the day. And, you know, without any judgment, just tick off and see what happens on these really, really tiny things. Right? Just get some data on how, you know, uncertain or certain the world is for you. Okay, so then I was going to just talk about this individual who's a drug dealer. His name is Snow on the Bluff. And he operates in this radically uncertain world, in this world where, you know, several family members have been killed. And so it's an interesting thing to look at it, you know, from an Agile consulting point of view, how this person operates, right? You know, if this person, for example, has Gantt charts predicting the future 6 months out, right? That would raise questions about the Agile approach, right? On the other hand, if the person is doing something like what Agile recommends, that would be further support, right? Because understand that being a drug dealer, there's super high pressure on that, right? There's a lot of evolutionary pressure, right? If you get it wrong, you die, right? So bad drug dealers don't exist for a very long time, right? And so the good ones, you know, have evolved a lot, have really worked on these practices, have really worked on this belief system, right? And so it's something that we can copy from and view, right? And so I should mention, you know, like one of the impressive things about Whitey Bulger is how old he is, right? Just the fact that he's lived that long is impressive, right? So he must have some set of practices, some belief system that has allowed him to operate for such a long period of time. Okay, so I'm going to narrate this a little bit, since you guys have requested that. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. So Snow on the Bluff is a skinny-looking guy. and he has like a small beard or small mustache, okay? And he's standing around, and he gets a guy comes along and says, there are these other drug dealers that have these really great drugs, okay? And he shows him the drugs, and Snow on the Bluff can't believe how good the drugs are. Because one of the ways that he, as a drug dealer, gets drugs is to steal them from other drug dealers, okay? But he doesn't actually believe this guy, okay? So think about this, what this guy does as something like backlog discovery. Okay, this is something new that I might be adding to my backlog, okay? But first, I want to de-risk it, okay? So he goes to these two other people and says, drop by that place and try to buy some drugs to see what's going on, right? And they come back and they report on that, right? So he does a little experiment, okay? To check to see if that data is right, okay? It turns out to be correct, okay? And so he starts taking action. So think of that as, backlog prioritization, right? He moves it up to the top of the backlog, and then he goes and sees for himself, right? So that's, a Gemba walk, right? Go to where the work is, and then he takes down the other drug guy, right? So do you guys really want me to narrate?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so he's looking at drugs, and he's saying, wow, these are really awesome drugs, okay? And this is the person who has described to him the drugs. And he's checking them out, and pretty soon he'll run the experiment. Right, so they're all admiring the dope. Okay, now he's taking the guy apart, trying to verify the information. Okay, Snow on the Bluff is the guy on the right with the black hat.
Is this the stand-up?
He's not going to stand up. Okay, so he's asking for information.
He's asking 3 questions.
Okay. Okay, now he's going to run the experiment, right? He gets 2 other people, and now he's going to say, hey, go by this place and figure it out. Right, so he just says, we don't know how true that is, right? The information that he just got. Okay. Right? So he says, you two go up there, right? So they're gonna run the experiment. Okay. Figure out if they're for real, what he just said.
Would it help if you took your microphone and held it up to the...
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
Damn! I know damn well it ain't that motherfucking close. That's already. They gonna give me 411. They gonna give me 411. Chill.
They got it, China.
What?
They got it all.
What? They showed it to you?
They got it.
Oh shit. You ain't gotta say no more then. That's all we need. That's all we need. That's all we need. So we ready tonight. We gonna get them tonight. You gonna get them tonight. You gonna get them tonight. So you see me though? Okay. We gonna keep it on the hush. Trying to scope them to see what's up. So goddamn, we can see how shit going. They serve more shit than those customers going to them. You see this shit, you niggas doing all goddamn ready. Y'all see this shit, they got customers already. 2, 3 of them going at the door at one time. Come from the opposite way, man. Them boys booming. Yeah, you see them? How many of them you see? How many of them here? That shit right here pissing me off, bro. Yeah, that man, he on the phone one day for the fuck he talking to. Ain't no motherfucking doubt about it. Ain't no doubt about that. I can add anything there. Yeah, let me hit that. Cause boy, tell I'm sure if I want to go there right now and shoot all 3 of them in their head. I want to take that to the old school. I'm gonna calm down. But boy, I gotta do something about that tonight. Don't nobody move nobody in the curb shit. Niggas like you run shit. Who the fuck? Who you in? Who the fuck? What them niggas from? They know where I'm from. Niggas motherfucking Bluff. Niggas ain't too broad in Vine City. We waiting on Jessica right now, so let's come. Let's go. Come on, girl. Let's do it. All right.
ready for a sprint execution. And you're going to go ahead and do it once they verify it, right? So, for me, that's very interesting, right? To see people, using techniques that are consistent with Agile techniques and Agile practices, right? In these, highly intense environments where there's lots of uncertainty about the way the world works. And so they actually go down and they actually get the guy. So the technique actually worked, right? So they were able to deliver business value. Okay, so that's the end of the 4 parts. So I invite you to just stand up again, and we'll close out by doing our favorite exercise. Oh my gosh, some of you are going straight into it. So remember, it's left arm under. It's sort of important. So we'll do 9. Okay, so inhale on the way down, and then exhale. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. All right, and you're welcome to have another piece of dark chocolate. So I was going to end these last few minutes and just talk about these 2 pieces of community that I love to build. So as Norman Dowd said, one of them is a great idea. Okay? We'll find out how that is. So I'm going to talk about the Virtual Agile Reading Group. So the Virtual Agile Reading Group simply reads papers that have to do with Agile. It's virtual because we meet online. So the idea is to limit it to 10 people or thereabouts. If there are more people, they just generate their own reading group. Maybe meet 2 to 4 times per month, right, up to the group, right? This is just a proposed structure. So we read a piece of the book, or we read the whole article, and everyone just shows up with an idea, a question, a comment on it. And then we do something like lean coffee. So lean coffee is not really important what it is, but it's just a little way of getting an agenda at the beginning of a meeting. And then we just go through it, making sure that everyone has the opportunity to talk at least once. And we close at the end of the hour. Maybe we have a facilitator, maybe we don't. We're using technology like this, Google Hangouts, which I'm using now for a class, and it really works well. Almost as good as face-to-face communication. Okay, and then the Agile Practice Group, right? This is the idea that Norman Dowd has said is a great idea. So happy to hear that. So like Norman, I'm a member of Toastmasters. And Toastmasters is a group which is it's a speaking organization. It's an organization that helps people become better speakers. And the way they do it is by having people speak, right? And so they have manuals that look like this one. This is the very first manual. And there are 10 different speeches. And so there's a little bit of information about each one, right? Like the very first one is an icebreaker, which is a biographical introduction, right? So the person actually stands up in front of a group and gives that talk. They're really short. This one's 4 to 6 minutes. The rest of them are 5 to 7 minutes. The very last one is 8 to 10 minutes. And then they get immediate feedback. So for me, this is just a huge gap in the Agile community, right? Tomorrow, I'm going to be facilitating a retrospective. I'm a professional Agile consultant, have been doing it for years. The last time I facilitated a retrospective was 5 months ago, right? So I don't have a place to go where I can practice even really basic skills, like a retrospective and get feedback. I can do it in front of the mirror, right? But that is not as nearly as effective as doing it with someone else, right? So the idea is that we would create a manual, maybe with these 10 things, which would have things like give feedback, receive feedback, facilitate a retrospective, 10 skills that one would want to have as an Agile consultant, Scrum Master, etc. And we assemble into a group, and people would pick things off of that, stand up in the front, do something for 5 to 10 minutes, and then receive immediate feedback. Right? That's the basic outline of the idea. Okay? It'll be fleshed out. That's just my guess at it. It's whatever we want it to be, of course. So again, I have another sign-up sheet for this. And if you're interested, again, indication of interest, what'll happen is that you'll get an email saying, let's meet in Harvard Square to talk about what the first Agile practice group might be like, and we'll figure it out from there. So, again, David Kramer. Okay, so that's the end of my talk, and I'm also at the end of my time. So thank you so much for having me here.